Welcome to On the DOT. On today's episode, we speak with Darcy Bullock. Darcy is a professor of engineering at Purdue University and also the director of the Joint Transportation Research Program. He joins us today to talk about how data we gather from connected vehicles has helped us improve work zone safety, particularly on Indiana interstates. Darcy also talks charging stations for electric vehicles and how the data they are gathering also gives insight into the need for charging stations and where they're needed the most. Before we begin, please take a moment and download the INDOT app for Apple and Android devices. You can also listen to previous episodes of On the DOT by searching INDOT on YouTube. Now let's join INDOT Southwest Communications Director Jason Tiller for his conversation with Darcy Bullock.
Did you know that INDOT also has an eye on the sky? INDOT inspects nearly 120 aviation facilities in Indiana, including seaplane bases and heliports. To learn more about these and other multimodal programs, go to multimodal.indot.in.gov. We're more than just Hoosier Roads.
Welcome to On the DOT. My name is Jason Tiller, Communications Director for INDOT Southwest. And this month, I am joined by Darcy Bullock. He is a professor of civil engineering at Purdue University. He's also the director of the Joint Transportation Research Program. Darcy, how are you doing?
Very good. Thank you for having me, Jason.
I'm glad to have you on. So this is different than anything I've ever done on the podcast to date, because normally I'm talking about INDOT related, specifically like winter ops or customer service or something like that, but we really haven't delved into some of the research that we're doing as a statewide transportation agency, and we're very fortunate to have partnerships with Purdue, and particularly with JTRP and some of the amazing things that you guys are doing. I want to jump right in, Darcy, if you don't mind. And so let's talk about in particular, let's talk about some of the data that we're gathering and some of the programs that we have going on that are, really making a difference in how we plan transportation projects and how we shape construction zones and things of that nature.
Thanks, Jason. I vividly remember in March 2017 when Commissioner McGinnis spoke, and he said, we need to prepare our roads for the next generation of connected and autonomous vehicles. And that really launched that collaboration between Purdue and INDOT on bringing in connected vehicle data in the near term, inform us on how the network is performing during winter operations and during construction events.
So let's talk a little bit about the data that we're gathering. Particularly, Joe has been very vocal about autonomous vehicles. They're coming. They're here, but they're coming in spades because they're becoming more popular. I mean, I see more and more Teslas driving around. Ford Motor Company, GM, all of the major car companies are not far behind them. So let's talk about the data that we're gathering. Go into some detail. What are some of the things, some of the details, some of the data points that we're gathering from these vehicles, and what are they telling us?
Yeah, Jason. So it's often joked that today's cars are iPhones on wheels.
They really are.
and that joke probably came out first with Teslas, but it's all the vehicles out there. It's the Chevrolets, it's the Fords. And what we're doing here in Indiana between Purdue and INDOT, we're ingesting about 12 billion records per month of connected vehicles on our highways. And what that tells us is, what are the speeds of the interstates and the arterials out there? Where are there hard braking events? We even get windshield wiper events.
Oh, wow.
So what we can do with this is Google Maps gives you a snapshot of what's happening right now. But from an agency perspective, when you can look at a longitudinal view over a week or a month or a year, you can identify trends, and from those trends, those help inform and prioritize future capital investments so we can prioritize and target those scarce construction dollars towards the projects that are in most need. Now, from a tactical operation, things like hard braking events, we ingest the hard braking events every single day, and on a weekly basis, we send out to all of the districts and the construction directors, locations along the interstate where we're seeing a large number of hard braking events. Hard braking events are indicators of crash risk. And what that allows us to do is identify emerging areas on the interstate where, hey, maybe we need to pay attention to a taper, or maybe we need to pay attention to a weaving area. Maybe there's an opportunity to improve that. And if we reduce hard braking events, we can reduce crashes.
For sure. And so let's put that in context a little bit for the general public. Typically, whenever you have a traffic signal somewhere, you see a lot of rear end crashes. All right. And so those are similar to what we call back of queue crashes. But typically it's because, somebody's not paying attention, hard braking, and they don't get on them hard enough, or maybe they're on them too late. And so you have that rear end. So, typically where we have traffic signals and hard braking events, as you were saying, that's where you start to see back of queue rear end type crashes, correct?
Absolutely. And so probably a good point to point out. I mean, many times, a vast majority of these back of queue crashes or rear end are inattentive drivers. And we can't control that, but sometimes we can find some mitigating measures out there to just kind of increase the awareness and the alertness. And one of the programs that John McGregor and company at the TMC have initiated in the last year and a half are the Q trucks. And those Q trucks, they place at locations along the interstate where they know they're going to have queuing, and historically they've had a lot of hard braking events. And what we've seen, Jason, just in the last few months with the enhanced deployment, we've analyzed 700 hours of Q truck operation. We see hard braking events have decreased by 80% when we have the Q truck present. So if we know we're reducing hard braking events by 80%, we know we're going to reduce crashes by approximately the same proportion. And that's kind of exciting from both the being tactically allocating resources from the data, but more importantly, being able to see an impact and assess that.
So paint me a word picture. We talked about this Q truck, but for someone who's not familiar with it, how would you describe what they'll be seeing out on interstate or wherever we deploy a Q truck?
So our biggest risk on the interstate for crashes is generally not in the urban areas for the back of queue crashes. People drive through downtown Indianapolis or on the Borman. They're expecting those stop and go type conditions occasionally. Where as a nation, we have the highest risk of these back of queue crashes, and the same thing in Indiana, is on our rural sections of interstate. People are driving along. They may not be as attentive as we wish they would be, and they end up just driving into the back of stopped traffic. So the Q truck program that INDOT has initiated combines both a large truck with attenuators, signs, message boards, and some strobes to increase the alertness. The other thing that INDOT is doing with those Q trucks is they have what's called a Waze alert. So as that vehicle moves, that information is updated in Waze. So people who are out there using Waze are seeing those alerts that there's an emergency vehicle on the road ahead. And we're finding that's having a significant impact beyond just the traditional lights and signs, is getting those messages into the car. That is the next frontier of work zone signing, is getting those electronic alerts inside the vehicle.
And that makes total sense too, because most people, especially if they're in an area they're unfamiliar with, they're relying on their GPS. And 10 years ago, that was a TomTom. And boy, I just dated myself a little bit with that reference. But, nowadays, people are using Siri. We're using Apple or Google Maps or Waze. Is that something, that we're eventually planning to, we've got the partnership with Waze. Are we eventually going to work that into Apple and Google as well?
Absolutely. We're navigation system agnostic. Waze just happened to be the first platform that we could pilot this with. And the provider that we're working with, the goal is to have those into all the major navigation platforms. And this scales beyond just the Q trucks. The INDOT TMC, Traffic Management Center, is going to be putting them in the Hoosier Helpers. And I could absolutely see this scaling to your vehicles out there in the districts that have crash attenuators when you're doing maybe mobile crack sealing, mobile patching, being able, whenever we're going to have some type of lane reduction, lane restriction, if we can get the electronic messages into the car to supplement what we already do for those roadside messages, that's an important new frontier. And in fact, on short-term closures, it might even be better. Short-term events, it might even be better than the effort it takes to put a sign out. So if you're only going to be out there, I don't know, picking up roadkill for a minute or two, you're probably better off having some type of navigation alert in there than a extensive set of signs, because you're actually going to reduce the exposure to the maintenance personnel. That's a judgment call. That's something that needs to be discussed. But the shorter the duration, probably the more applicable these in-vehicle alerts will be.
Yeah, I mean, it makes so much sense to do it that way because everyone is looking at their phone. I mean, that's 90% of why we have the hands-free Indiana law, is because we can't get people off their phones. So why not, use that to our advantage, right?
Absolutely. I drive to Indianapolis probably 2 or 3 times a week. I know exactly where I'm going, but every single trip I use navigation so that I get that in-vehicle alert. And also I like it just because it gives me my estimated time to arrival so I can coordinate. And heck, I was talking to you on the way up here today, and that estimated time of arrival, a lot of people are using it that we wouldn't think of just because it gives them better situational awareness on the roads.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Darcy, let's take a break here. And when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about the data that we're collecting, some of the really cool, not only public-facing, but some of the programs that we're using where we can show people not just internally and externally, I guess I should say, but we'll talk about how we're using those programs to really innovate as far as safety goes, and some of the work that goes into gathering all that data. We'll be right back with more on the DOT.
Before 1989, INDOT was known as the Indiana Department of Highways, but highways became transportation, and our logo tells the story why. Only one of the 4 icons, the car, represents Indiana roadways. The airplane, the train, and the bus represent some of the other modes of transportation that our multimodal division helps manage. Along with the Federal Highway Administration, INDOT works with federal agencies for rail, aviation, freight, and transit. To learn more, visit us online at multimodal.indot.in.gov. INDOT, we're more than just Hoosier roads.
This is Sergeant Todd Ringel with Indiana State Police. According to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, distracted driving claims thousands of lives every year. Many drivers use their cell phones while driving. That creates an enormous potential for fatalities and injuries on our roadways. Distracted driving is any activity that diverts your attention from driving, including talking or texting on your phone. You cannot drive safely unless the task of driving has your full attention. You can help us reduce crashes by putting down your cell phone, avoiding all other distractions, and just drive.
Welcome back to On the DOT. I'm joined by Darcy Bullock, the professor of civil, or one of the professors, I guess I should say, of civil engineering at Purdue University, but also the director of JTRP, which stands for the Joint Transportation Research Program. And Darcy, we talked last segment a lot about some of the safety innovations and some of the amazing things we're doing, just gathering data from autonomous and connected vehicles. But, we live in an age where people don't have a lot of trust in government and things like this. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that. The data that we're gathering, this is not something where Big Brother is watching you, right?
No, really good question, Jason, or comment. And privacy is critically important in this. So it's probably worth just spending a few minutes talking about that.
Yeah, for sure.
So as the automotive industry and the state Department of Transportation have evolved over the last 50 years, we kind of were in a mode where the auto folks built cars and we built roads and we didn't talk. And we've now got to the point where we now know, I say, the cars know more about our infrastructure than we do. And we need to find a way to partner with the auto industry to use some of that information without violating privacy or trust, or just plain creepy. So when we look at these analytic procedures, we do not focus on individual trips. We look at aggregate type behavior. So there's multiple layers of privacy built in. First of all the data coming in is anonymized. All we know is the date and the time that it was out there.
So if you're driving a Tesla, we're not going to know this is Bob's Tesla.
We do not know that.
Okay.
And then more importantly, once that we get that data, we aggregate it. And we usually aggregate at least to 1 minute intervals, and usually 5, 15 minutes, or even a day. And what we then look for is trends like what section of I-65 or I-69, how many miles of it are operating below 45 miles an hour. That's a really critical number for us because in general, the interstate almost always operates over 45 unless there's an incident or inclement weather. And in fact, in the real heavy rains in the summer, we'll occasionally see speeds drop below 45. If there is a crash in the side of the road, you'll always see kind of that rubbernecking phenomena in both directions. During winter weather, we'll actually see as the storm comes in, you'll see kind of that gradual degradation. And in fact, speeds drop slightly before actually the roads start becoming slippery. So by looking at that data in aggregate over time, we can infer things like how many hours of the day is the road over capacity? Are there incidents out there? How are our maintenance or construction activity impacting traffic? How long did last week's winter storm last? How many miles of our district were impacted? Those are the sorts of management and system level data elements that we can pull out that definitely aren't being definitely not being creepy, but emphasize that the value that all of those cars out there on the road, what they can tell us for information that really wouldn't be cost effective if we put sensors out there every couple miles. We just can't afford to put that type of instrumentation in the road.
Yeah, absolutely. And, for now, I think autonomous or connected vehicles like the Teslas and things like that, those are less than 5% of our drivers at this point statewide, correct?
Absolutely.
And so, but those vehicles, even though they are less than 5%, can still give us valuable insight on what non-connected vehicles are doing because 9 out of 10 times, or maybe 10 out of 10 times, I don't really know, they're in normal traffic. So they're going to be able to tell you, like, you can bet dollars to donuts that if you've got a Tesla out there that's sending us data, there's a 1974 Ford pickup right in front of them that's doing pretty much the same thing, right?
Absolutely. And so maybe just kind of without getting into too much specifics, in general, it's more of the common fleet vehicles that have the connected technology and less of the higher end vehicles like Tesla. But your point is very well articulated is we're seeing about between, depending on whether it's interstate or non-interstate, 4 to 5% of the vehicles are connected out there. So if you think about yourself sitting in stop traffic on the interstate, and there's 20 cars in front of you, one of those cars we're going to see the data on. That's good enough for us to infer very good information out. And again, also points out that we don't have to have every single vehicle in the data feed coming in, and that kind of further kind of protects the privacy of our motorists out there.
Yeah, and that's wonderful. So let's talk a little bit about the program itself now. I know that when we were preparing for this podcast, we did a webinar or a web meeting, however you want to say it, and you showed me how we use this data, or how we put this data into, I don't know how to say it, but we basically, how we personify it or how we picture it. And, you've got these graphs that show you, and I think it was green that was normal traveling, and then you had red and pink that would show you where you had people stopping and things like that. So let's talk about building all that and entering all that data into those graphs and how we see it. What's the process there to build all of that visual representation, and how long does it take?
So Jason, let's talk about I-65. It covers 3 of our districts here.
Yeah, it's a major road.
And if you think about the data, we care about data in both the northbound and southbound direction. And we generally, from a state agency perspective, care about, to the nearest mile or mile marker, what are the conditions out there. So we typically do a rectangle view for each day where 0 to 24 hours is along the horizontal axis, and the mile markers is along the vertical direction in northbound and southbound direction. If the entire rectangle is all green in both direction, life is good. We have no problems out there. But if we start seeing some yellows and oranges, we can see what time of day and what mile marker or what location on the interstate those are. And then we got one other color, and that's white. That's when it's closed. So for example, right now with the North Split, downtown Indianapolis, there's a section of I-65 that's white because we're getting no data because it's closed. But that gives us a very nice picture. And typically what we see right now in July 2021, we typically see clusters of reds and oranges in the Lebanon area and somewhere down in the Columbus area where there's construction activity. We'll see some other isolated incidents. Maybe there's a crash or something, but we see what we call recurring congestion at those zones every day. A little bit different behavior on the weekend. And what that then gives you a tool is assessing how are we doing? Are we getting better? Are we getting worse? Or are we kind of maintaining the status quo? And that's helpful as you get maybe media inquiries. How are things going? You can give them some factual information. So for example, if we looked at I-70, that's another east-west corridor over towards Ohio. You can see that about 10 o'clock in the morning is when that work zone starts exhibiting some elements of congestion, and it stretches till about 6 p.m. And pick your number, it's in the 3 to 4 mile range of those queues. And you'll see that that's where we deploy queue trucks and where there's been a lot of focus by our construction crews on providing additional level of warning to travelers on that road of potential queuing ahead.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things I wanted to talk about was that, that data that we gather and that graph that we see shows us very specifically how we can improve in specific situations. But also one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was, we can point to, a crash, or we can point to some type of event on our roadways and then use that data to study how traffic behaved during that time. And that's got to be useful for us just to study how people behave during crashes and events like that.
Yeah, it's useful to study, but it's even more rewarding to see the impact that's having. So we've been working with the Tippecanoe County Sheriff's Office, Captain Hangy. And not only is he a captain in the Sheriff's Office, but he's also a volunteer fire department officer and has several runs a month out on the interstate. And we've shared with him some of these heat maps. He's now gone back and shared those analysis with the volunteer firefighters. And as INDOT has been working on what we call the in-time program with first responders to make sure the scene is safe and secure, but once aid's been rendered and injured parties have been transported, when you're moving into that recovery phase, if we can start opening lanes safely and restore 1 or 2 lanes, what that does is it reduces the queuing and it reduces the risk of secondary crashes. So what we're seeing now is some of these internal tools are now becoming a very useful tool as we work with our public safety partners to explain, here's why we'd like you to look at some of these improved incident clearance procedures so that we can all work together, create a safe environment for you to work in, but also reduce exposure to the motoring public of queues associated with unplanned incidents such as crashes.
Yeah. So, kind of to sum up, not only is this data helping us, improve work zone safety for our people, but it's also improving safety for first responders. It's improving safety for the motoring public. It sounds as though we've got, just a lot of potential in just those numbers.
Absolutely. And the part that's kind of really rewarding is to see the national visibility that Indiana is getting. The Federal Highway Administration has a program called Everyday Counts, EDC, and several of the INDOT colleagues, Ed Cox, Jim Sturdivant, John McGregor, Jeremy McGuffey, have had a national voice sharing Indiana's best practices on this. So it's very, very cool. If you look on the Federal Highway website, you'll see several of these case studies highlighted, and you'll see some of our colleagues at INDOT sharing those successes with their peers in other states.
Yeah, definitely good news. So, Darcy, let's take one more break. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about what JTRP has going on and some of the other things maybe outside of this particular data. We'll be right back with more on the DOT.
In 2019, distracted driving was a factor in nearly 2,000 injury crashes in Indiana, killing more than 20 people. To make Hoosier roads safer, hands-free while driving is now the law. That means you can't have a mobile device in your hand while driving. You can still use a phone or tablet in your car, but you must use a speakerphone, headset, Bluetooth, or other hands-free technology. Go hands-free. Learn about the new law at handsfreeindiana.com.
Somebody needs to report that pothole.
Why aren't they mowing the grass in the median?
When are they going to fix this road?
You know there's an easy way to get answers to those questions and report the problems you see on interstates, U.S. routes, and state roads. Dial 1-855-INDOT-4U to talk to a live customer service professional. That's 855-463-6848. Hate talking on the phone or have a fear of human interaction? We've got you covered. Go online to INDOT4U.com to use our Report a Concern tool. You can also report a concern through our INDOT mobile app for iPhone and Android. If you've got questions, we've got answers at 855-INDOT4U or online at INDOT4U.com.
Welcome back to On the DOT, final segment with Darcy Bullock. He is a professor of civil engineering at Purdue University and also the director of the Joint Transportation Research Program. Now, Darcy, we've talked a lot about the data that we're gathering from connected and autonomous vehicles, but what we really haven't talked about in this episode is how this is all technology that's going into vehicles now, and we're starting to see it with the Teslas, with the Chevy Volts, with some of the vehicles that are going hybrid, but also going completely electric. And so, being Indiana, being very rural in most places, I imagine that there's not a lot of places to charge these vehicles, and that's something that we're going to have to start looking at, just as we've looked at connected and autonomous, getting fiber down on our highways so that we can get the data and keep these vehicles talking to each other. Can you talk a little bit about, kind of what JTRP and INDOT are doing, to start thinking about that?
Absolutely, Jason. So with regards to electric vehicles, probably the number one, there's probably two dominant themes in electric vehicles. First of all, they're coming, and they're coming fast. You can see the automotive OEMs have made large announcements about when they're going to make transitions. But the other reality of this is we need to charge these. And so this concept of range anxiety with electric vehicles is real. We want to make sure that we can make it to our destination and at least be able to charge or charge en route. So one of the things we've been looking at with the connected vehicle data is broad classes of categories of vehicles. We've been looking at what we call the internal combustion engine, and we've been looking at the electric vehicles. And we've been looking at what sections of all of our interstates have the highest vehicle miles traveled with electric vehicles, and which exits see the most electric vehicle traffic that do short duration stops, 30 minutes or 60 minutes, because those are candidates for where we want to prioritize putting charging infrastructure. And it's not clear whether this is going to be private sector makes the investment in charging infrastructure or whether there's some state investment. What we're focusing on right now is just where does that transportation community need the charging infrastructure? We're identifying where are what we call our charging deserts on the interstate, and we're defining charging deserts of sections of interstate in Indiana with more than 50 miles of between stations that have charging within 1 mile. So if you can get off and get to a charging station with 1 mile, we feel that's that's about what people expect with a gas station. Probably a little closer, but it's reasonable. So what we're doing is doing two things: looking at where the electric vehicles are being used, and where are they exiting most, so that we can help provide informed data on where some of those future investments might come. And with the new infrastructure bill coming, I don't know what's going to be in it, but I'm certain there's going to be opportunity to invest in some of that. And I think it's important for Indiana to be in a position of we know where we need that, so we're not in a mode of just having to, look at a map and take guesses.
Well, and it makes total sense too, because, think back to when the first internal combustion engines were made. I mean, I'm sure you didn't have a gas station on every corner, but now, we do. You don't have anxiety about traveling cross country because you're going to be able to get gas pretty much anywhere along the interstate. And so now we're challenged with probably what the car manufacturers were challenged with back, in 1900 whatever, when the first Ford Model T came out. We've got to start thinking about planning and future planning. And, it's like you said, electric vehicles are coming, and they're coming fast. I mean, I believe, was it Tesla that's even experimented with a semi, an completely electric, fully autonomous semi truck. And so those things are coming, and, technology seems to be advancing so quickly, and it's vital that we keep up with it.
Absolutely. And, looking even further down the road, Pam Fisher at INDOT's been a strong partner with Nadia Gritska in civil engineering, looking at even further down the road this wireless charging on the road. So Purdue has a project with the National Science Foundation right now where we're going to be building a short test track to effectively do what we do right now every day with our own personal electronic devices. We put it on a wireless charger. Is it feasible to move towards that in-road wireless charging so we can extend the range of vehicles out there? And again, we want to be a leader there. Indiana's the second largest automotive GDP in the country. Michigan's probably always going to be first, but we want to aggressively grow and adapt and be a leader in that space.
Yeah, and when you think about how much freight, how many goods move through Indiana, I mean, it seems like a no-brainer that we would have this technology and have it available and ready to go for whenever our legislature decides to start putting money into that.
Absolutely. And Jason, you probably know this, but about $650 billion of freight moves to, through, or from the state every year. And that preserving that and growing that is a huge priority for all of us in the state.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Darcy, we are actually out of time for this episode, but I can't thank you enough. There's some really great information in this episode, and if you need to go back and listen to it again, please do so, because this is definitely important stuff that everyone is going to need to be aware of, in the next few years. So, Darcy, thank you so much for being on the DOT with us today.
Thank you, Jason.
There's never been a better time to start your career with INDOT. Entry-level positions now start at $19 an hour, and with a CDL, you can earn even more. Go to INDOTjobs.com or text INDOT Careers to 468-311 to apply now.
Did you know that INDOT Freight helps make your drive safer by helping truckers find a safe, legal parking spot for their mandated breaks? To learn more about the Truck Parking Information Management System and other multimodal projects, go to multimodal.indot.in.gov.
Thank you for listening to On the DOT. Be sure and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you enjoy this show, please spread the word by leaving us a 5-star review. INDOT is on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and also on the web at indot.in.gov. The INDOT app for Apple and Android devices can be a handy tool if you're looking for road conditions or project information. To report a concern on a number state route, U.S. route, or interstate, please call our toll-free number at 1-855-INDOT-4U. You can also report your concerns online 24/7 at indot4u.com. Thank you for listening and safe travels.